This is the first class in our session about the philosophy of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, left a huge void in literally legacy. And in this course, we will address many key features of his philosophy through the examination of his key works. I'll introduce Rabbi Alex. Oh, here he is. He's back. So I'll just give an introduction of him as well. So Rabbi Alex Israel is a popular international lecturer, author, and podcaster teaching at Midrashet Lindenbaum and at Yeshivat Heretz Hatzvi as well.
Okay, so first of all, I do apologize. I am doing this from Midrashet Lindenbaum, which has awful Wi-Fi, as you know by now. So I apologize for the delay in me getting on, and the only way to do this was through my phone. So here we are. So let's begin with our introduction to Rabbi Sacks's Torah. And today is going to be by way of an introduction. We'll see what we can do in terms of the videos. So let me begin by this. I'm going to start with a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that I am not Rabbi Sacks. Anything that Rabbi Sacks could say, anything that I could say, Rabbi Sacks could say better than me. And therefore, when I am talking about Rabbi Sacks, you're going to have to put up with me. I apologize. We are very lucky that Rabbi Sacks left us with 30 books. He loved technology, and therefore he created all sorts of videos, speeches which were recorded, and all different technological solutions which would enable us to be able to learn from his Torah. And that's why we have so much of his material. So let's dive in. We've already spent a bit of time waiting, and I'm going to start already. I'm going to begin with the beginning of the source sheet, something a little light, as Rabbi Sacks liked to always do, and that is from an interview with Tim Ferriss. I put all of the links so you can listen to them. They're wonderful. And Tim Ferriss says the following. He says, I wanted to start with perhaps an unusual starting point, and that is yellow ties. And that is, he says, the Rabbi Sacks, right? I found under the category of strange habits, a note from your wife for 50 years, saying that he always wears a yellow tie, especially when he's going to give an elaborate speech. Is there any truth to that? And Rabbi Sacks says, 100%, Tim. I always used to wear silver ties, this kind of dignified thing that ministers of religion do. And I had a huge collection of silver ties. Then, at a certain point in time, I'm not sure whether it was 2016 or a little earlier than that, the world began to fall apart. And that was when I realized that part of my job was not just to speak or to write, but to cheer people up. And I think Little Miss or Little Mr. Cheerful should be colored yellow. So I thought wearing a yellow tie cheers people up. And by and large, consciously or subconsciously, it does. However, I also do something else, he says. I might have 50 yellow ties, but when I'm doing a really difficult speech, I wear a yellow tie that's been given to me by a very close friend. My friends, noticing that I wear yellow ties, tend to make a present of a yellow tie. And when I feel I'm wearing something that a friend gave me in love, it just makes the speech so much easier. So that's a lovely introduction to Rabbi Sacks and just how human he was. When you see a picture of Rabbi Sacks with a yellow tie, now you know where they come from. But look at this, right? He's aware of the impression he has on people. He's aware that he is somebody who can, by his own persona, can cheer people up. He's aware that a gift from a friend can make him give the speech even better. And this gives us, a good window into what Rabbi Sacks is about. And what I'm going to do today is to try and give an introduction to him, to his philosophy, to his personality, and to his writings. So that's what we're going to try and do. And we're going to see if we can do that together in the next few minutes. I'm actually going to maybe log in to Zoom as myself, and so then I can actually share the screen at the same time. Maybe we'll try and do it that way.
I'm happy to support with that, however you need.
Okay. 1 minute. I'm just going to try and join. You should see me joining any second.
I'll have to make you a co-host first.
Great.
Okay. Okay, done.
Right, just 1 second. Let me turn off my volume here. Okay. Let me see if I can share the screen, and then we'll be good. Okay. Here we go. All right. So, I actually don't even need the screen at this point. I'm going to unshare it, and then we'll go back to, we'll share it in a minute. Okay. So let's see what we're doing here. I want to share a version of understanding Rabbi Sacks, which comes from Professor Micha Goodman. And he is a stunning lecturer and has a stunning perspective on Rabbi Sacks. And this maybe will be able to give us an understanding. And the first side of Rabbi Sacks is that Judaism is, and this is the name of one of his books, radical then, radical now. What do I mean? Let's put it this way. Ever since the emancipation, Jews have had a problem. Religion has seemed exclusivist, non-scientific, non-egalitarian, maybe even misogynist, sometimes non-rationalist, even, might we say, a source of violence. And therefore, religion has been given a very, very bad reputation in the modern world. And if I'm a modern person and I'm affiliated with values of equality and modernity, what does religion have to offer me? And now we're going to get the first chidush, the first side of what Rabbi Sacks is going to give to us. Rabbi Sacks says, all of those Western values that you know, freedom, equality, dignity of human beings, all of those, all the roots of the Western, even science itself, the idea of a rationalist world, all of these things come from us, comes from the Torah, comes from God. This is Judaism's gift to the world. So let's take a look at the sheet, and I'll give you just a couple of stories where Rabbi Sacks is going to, I'm going to give you a couple of stories where Rabbi Sacks is going to share this. Here it is. In 1966, 1 second. In 1966, he says, an 11-year-old boy moved with his parents and family to a white neighborhood in Washington. Sitting with 2 brothers and 2 sisters on the front step of his house, he waited to see how they would be greeted. They were not. Passers-by turned to look at them, but not one of them gave a smile or even a glance of recognition. All the fearful stories he'd heard about how whites treated blacks seemed to be coming true. Years later, writing about those first days in their new home, he said, I knew we were not welcome here. I knew we would not be liked here. I knew we'd have no friends here. I knew we shouldn't have moved here. As he was thinking those thoughts, a white woman coming home from work passed by on the other side of the road. She turned to the children, and with a broad smile, she said, welcome. Disappearing into the house, she emerged minutes later with a tray laden with drinks and cream cheeses and jelly sandwiches, which she brought over to the children, making them feel right at home. That moment, the young man wrote later, changed his life. It gave him a sense of belonging where there was none before. It made him realize at a time when race relations in the United States were fraught, that a black family could feel at home in a white area, and there could be relationships that were colorblind. The young man, Stephen Carter, is now a law professor at Yale, and he eventually wrote a book about what he learned that day. He called it Civility. The name of the woman, he tells us, was Sarah Kestenbaum, and he adds that she was a religious Jew. In the Jewish tradition, he notes, such civility is called chesed, the doing of acts of kindness, which in turn derive from the understanding that human beings are made in the image of God. Civility adds itself may be seen as part of chesed. It does indeed require kindnesses to our fellow citizens, including ones who are strangers, even when it is hard. This is Rabbi Sacks at his finest here, where he's explaining that the whole principle that we have here, the whole idea that we have of chesed actually comes from Judaism. It comes from the Jewish people. It comes from our tradition. And this is what he's going to be saying both here and in other regards as well. Let me give you, back to the source sheet, a second example. He says, I once took Britain's leading childcare expert to a Jewish school where for the first time she saw young children rehearsing the Sabbath table, 5-year-old parents blessing 5-year-old children and welcoming 5-year-old guests. She, a non-Jew, was enthralled. She asked the children what they liked most about Shabbat. They replied, it's the time when mum and dad don't have to rush off. She said to me afterwards, you're giving those children the greatest gift, the gift of tradition, and it's saving their parents' marriages. Now, what do we have in these two stories? In these two stories, what we have is that Rabbi Sacks is telling us that if you want to have civility, if you want to have inclusion, if you want to be colorblind, you can learn those ideas of equality and dignity of human beings from Judaism. If you want to have Shabbat and have a 5-year-old say, that's the time when daddy and mommy don't need to run off. That's the time when I can spend time, or maybe for adults, that's when I can sort of unplug. If you want to have that idea, how are you going to have it? You're going to have it by Judaism. And therefore, you know, when we're talking about Rabbi Sacks, he was actually turning around and saying that those Western values, values of family, equality, dignity of human beings, it started with us. And in a future class, we'll look at the book of Bereshit and the way that he reads the book of Bereshit as a thoroughly modern text. Now, in this regard, Rabbi Sacks is drawing the roots of Western society from Judaism. And I have to say that Rabbi Sacks was a very spiritual person. If you ever saw Rabbi Sacks davening, he was incredibly spiritual. I remember seeing him with his tallis and tefillin over his head, and he looked like he was in another world. When he was interviewed by the BBC for Desert Island Discs, and he was asked to choose one song out of all the 10 songs which he would like to take to a desert island, he mentioned a certain nigun of the Lubavitcher Rebbe called Sama Lecha Nafshi. My heart thirsts for you, O God. And he said that the image of the soul craving, he said, if I had one song that could be my epitaph, if that's what people will say, that his soul craved for God, that's what I'd like people to say after he dies. And in fact, at his funeral, Rabbi Lionel Rosenfeld, Rabbi Chazan Lionel Rosenfeld, one of his best friends, actually sang that nigun. And in fact, that pasuk is on his gravestone. I'll give you one other example when it comes to prayer. When this comes from Rabbi Shaul Robinson, and he said that once Rabbi Sacks was visiting his synagogue, was visiting Lincoln Square Shul, and everybody's rushing to the shul to hear Rabbi Sacks, the great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. And Rabbi Sacks and the rabbi are walking to shul. And what's Rabbi Sacks concerned with? He says to him, he's not worried about his speech. He's not worried about whether he'll make a good impression. He says, will we be singing? Will davening be uplifting? And when he got to shul, he huddles with the chazan and to talk to him about what tunes he's going to do to get everybody uplifted. In this regard, we see that the deep essence of Rabbi Sacks' Judaism, and that he said that you will find this, if you want to understand the roots of the West, you'll find them within Judaism. He drew out humanistic readings from the Torah, etc. However, says Micha Goodman, that's not enough. Because if I tell you that equality and dignity of human beings and a day of rest and workers' rights are all coming from Judaism, then you'll just say to me, well, that's very nice, but now Westernism has done those things. Now the Western world has those values, so we don't need Judaism anymore. And if that first one was the punch, Western ideas come from the front hook, if you want. Now we're going to have the back hook. Rabbi Sacks says, yes, Western ideas come from Judaism, but, and here we get the second movement of Rabbi Sacks, but there is a problem with Western culture, and once again, Judaism has the answer. You know, Rabbi Sacks, as I said before, was a very Jewish leader, but on the other hand, Rabbi Sacks was a world leader. Some years ago, one of the institutions I teach, Yeshivat Eretz HaTzvi, Rabbi Sacks was asked about his role as a leader of modern Orthodoxy. And people said to him, you know, how do you look at, you know, the modern Orthodox world? How do you view the problems of the modern Orthodox world? And Rabbi Sacks surprisingly said, I don't see myself as a modern Orthodox leader. And we're all like, what? You don't see yourself as a modern Orthodox leader? If you're not a modern Orthodox leader, who is? And he said, listen to this statement that he made. He said, you know, he said, in the world, Jews are a minority of the world. In Judaism, the Orthodox are a minority of the Jewish people. In the Orthodox, the modern Orthodox are a minority of Orthodoxy. If I say I'm a modern Orthodox leader, then I'm saying I'm a minority of a minority of minority. What influence am I going to have as a result of that? He said, you know, last week I was talking to the, oh, sorry, 1 minute, I missed out one stage. He said, what does Avram Avinu say? When Avram meets the Bnei Chet, when Avram meets the people of Chet, what does he say about himself? Or what do they say about him? Nesi Elohim ata b'tocheinu. You are a prince of God in our midst. Said Rabbi Sacks, I don't want to represent modern Orthodoxy. I don't want to represent Orthodoxy. I want to represent God. And he said, last week, I was at Emory University, speaking in front of 20,000 people in a public conversation. If I was just a modern Orthodox leader, would I have been invited to do that? So Rabbi Sacks saw that he had something to contribute to the world. And let me explain what I mean by that. Rabbi Sacks, in his book Morality, spoke about issues such as loneliness, cancel culture, identity politics, political violence, the increasing disparities between rich and poor, you know, executive salaries and all. He called it cultural climate change. And he said, how are we going to resolve these problems in modernity? It's not enough just to be Western people. It's not enough that Judaism or the Judaic religions, the Mosaic religions, gave away to the West. It needs sustaining. And what's the solution, he said? It is religion. It was community, right? At the Millennial Conference in the year 2000, 2,000 religious leaders came together in the year 2000. Rabbi Sacks said, what can I offer? There are 2,000 religious leaders. What am I going to say? And then he turned around and says, well, you know, I've studied economics. I studied philosophy. I've been trained in these spheres. If I have the religion and the world knowledge, what he called not Torah or Mada, but Torah and Chachma, I have something to contribute. And Rabbi Sacks was a voracious reader. He read a book a day. I heard a great story from somebody who hosted him in their house over a Shabbat scholar in residence. And Rabbi Sacks went to rest on Shabbat afternoon. He went to rest on Shabbat afternoon and took a few books off the shelf and said, could I take a look at these while I rest? And they said, sure you can, of course. He comes down 3 hours later and he puts them back on the shelf. And the owner of the house says, you can take them. You know, I'm sure you'll bring them back sometime. Take your time. And he says, I've already read them. Rabbi Sacks had a way of swallowing books whole, remembering everything that he read. I'll just tell you one example that I heard from him. We were in a course in Jews College in London School of Jewish Studies in London, and he was teaching us how to read. We had to read a lot of philosophy for this course. He said to us, you know, when you finish a paragraph, summarize in your head the paragraph. When you finish a chapter, summarize the chapter. And when you finish the whole book, summarize the argument of the book, and then you'll never forget it. Well, I could do the summaries, even those were hard, but didn't mean I'd never forget it. But he didn't forget what he read. And that is why he didn't only say that the principles of Western society come from Judaism, but he actually saw Judaism, Western society in crisis, and thought that Judaism had the solutions. In that regard, he was a Nasi Elohim Ata B'tochenu. And that's why world leaders, from Mike Pence to Prince Charles to the Pope to whoever it was, right, sought his counsel. And he was brave. He went to the EU, the parliament of the EU, and he could have spoken about something easy. I don't know, the environment. He spoke about anti-Semitism. He went to the Vatican, and what did he speak about? The importance of family to all those cardinals. He didn't always take the easy way out. And he was very much a Jew on the world stage. He was the one who coined the phrase that non-Jews are embarrassed by Jews who are embarrassed by their Judaism. Non-Jews are proud of Jews who are proud of their Judaism. And this he experienced with his own abilities, because when he tells a great story. His great story is that he was on the way to the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin, traveling on Prince Charles's plane. He's traveling with Tony Blair. He's traveling with Gordon Brown. And on the way home, he takes out a Chumash. He takes out a Chumash and he starts learning the Parshat Shavua. And Prince Charles says to him, what is that book? I've never seen a book like that. A book with a text and with a Rashi and an Ibn Ezra and what have you. He says, I've never ever seen a book like that, quite like that. And he said to them, well, would you like to learn with me? Would you like to have a chavruta with me? And they said, sure. And he said, for an hour, he is teaching Prince Charles. He's teaching Tony Blair, Chumash. Here's Rashi, here's Ibn Ezra. And he quoted an amazing pasuk from Tehillim, a pasuk from Psalms, which says, Va'adabra neged malachim velo evosh. I will speak in the direction of kings and I will never be embarrassed. So this is it. For Rabbi Sacks, Rabbi Sacks is a thoroughly Western thinker in so many ways, and he feels that those Western values come directly from our tradition. And yet at the same time, he says the Western canon, the Western tradition is not enough. He especially felt this, I'm saying this the day after Yom HaShoah, that the Holocaust represented a complete bankruptcy of the Western set of values. And therefore, we need to find our inspiration not just from the West, not just from rationalism. And therefore, he said that Judaism still has so much to offer society. So that is the basic sketch of how Rabbi Sacks works. Take any Western value, you'll find its source in the Jewish world, but when you find the world in crisis, go back to Judaism and you'll find a solution too. It's beautiful. But I'd like to deal with the third aspect of Rabbi Sacks's persona, which I personally experienced, and we'll see what we can say about that. And that is this, that Rabbi Sacks, I'm speaking about as somebody who benefited from his guidance myself. He was a mentor to so many people. You know, the first Saturday nights, the first Motzei Shabbat when he was chief rabbi, where did he go? What did he do? He went to the local bagel place, Carmeli's in London, where all of the teenagers would hang out. And he hung out with them. He went and spent time on the sidewalk talking to them, listening to them. That's what he did. He'd go every single year, more than once a year once he retired as chief rabbi, to NYU, New York University. And Rabbi Joe Wolfson, who was the campus rabbi there, Rabbi Sacks would say to him, I'm giving you a day from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening. I'd like to meet with students in 20-minute slots. Rabbi Joe Wolfson said there was never a WhatsApp that he sent out that didn't get, which got a response like that. Rabbi Sacks is giving you 20-minute slots, here, sign in. And he'd sit there all day. He wouldn't even barely eat all day. He had two yogurts all day. And he'd sit with students and hear what they had to ask him and talk to them. And he showed interest in, I'll just give you a story again, a personal story. I was a yeshiva student studying to become a rabbi. And I went with a list to the chief rabbi's office, and I said, could I have half an hour with the chief rabbi? They found me some time. And I spoke about all topics under the sun with Rabbi Sacks. At the end, our 30 minutes were up, and the secretary came in and said, Rabbi Sacks, you've got another meeting. He feigned protest. He said, I'm having the best fun that I had all day, learning Torah with a rabbi. He made me feel on top of the world, but then he did something even more. I saw him scribbling something. He wrote, and he gave me a piece of paper. I said, what is this? He says, it's my home phone number. If you ever have questions like this, call me at home. I don't sleep. You can call me any hour of the day or night. I couldn't believe that the chief rabbi was giving me his own home phone number. But this is exactly the type of person he was. He made times for people. And here I'd like to share another text, which is on your source sheet. It's source number, it's source number 2. And you'll see it here, source number 2. It's from Pirkei Avot. And again, this is an explanation I heard from Rabbi Sacks himself. It says this, Chamisha Talmidim hayu Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great Tana, had 5 disciples. He would recount their praises. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus is a borsut she'eina ma'aber tipa. It's a sealed system that loses not a drop. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus had a phenomenal memory. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, right? Ashrei yoladato. Happy is the person who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yossi, Chassid, he's pious. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Yirei Chet, so one is pious, one is God-fearing. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach is Ma'ayan HaMitgaber. Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach is like a ever-increasing. Many people contrast Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach with Rabbi Eliezer at the top, ben Horkanus. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus is the memory bank. Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach create new chidushim, and the others in between are praised for their personalities. Rabbi Sacks asked the question. He says all sorts of Mishnahs in Pirkei Avot we can learn from. You know, Aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver, you can learn from. There are all sorts of Mishnayot which give us ethics of the fathers. But what do we learn from this? That Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples, so what? And he answered the following. He said, language can be descriptive, right? Language can be descriptive in the sense that it can describe, I'm wearing a blue shirt. Language can raise people, right? You can say that's a nice blue shirt. But he says sometimes language can actually be creative. And this is the example he gave. He says, imagine that you're in, high school, and you're studying English, and you're studying science, and you're studying music, and you're studying art, and you really don't know what to do with your life. And suddenly a teacher says, wow, you really have a way with words. You have such a talent. You should write more. Or they say to you, wow, I'd really look into doing some extra courses in maths or in computer programming because you have quite a talent. Suddenly that student turns around and says, there's something remarkable going on here. So this is indeed what we have. We have a situation in which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was able to look at his 5 students and say, this is what you should specialize in. And this is what you should specialize in. And this is what you should specialize in. He created people. I would argue that Rabbi Sacks did exactly that. Rabbi Sacks, in fact, created us. Us who were his students, he created us. I have speak to every person from my generation, people who are rabbis, people who are communal leaders, people who are what have you, and they will all say the same thing. I went to speak to Rabbi Sacks. Rabbi Sacks encouraged me. Rabbi Sacks found a way in order to make sure that I met the right people. Rabbi Sacks believed in me. And all of this was enabling us to be in a situation whereby we would be able to become the leaders that we became, and he really believed in us. Whenever I would meet him, he would turn around to me and say, what's your next project? Are you going to finish that book, right? When are you coming to teach? And he actually said to me, when are you coming to suffer with us in England? That was his line. And this is what we have. Okay, 1 second. I just want to share my sheet. I'm having a couple of technical difficulties. Hold on a minute, and I'll be with you. Here we go. Not sure what's going on here with my defunct computer. Just half a second, because I want to share the source sheets and do something with you now. Oh, so let me maybe finish this segment and say the following. What I think Sacks got this from, this whole idea of actually taking us on as mentors, I think he got from his own mentor. And in this regard, his own mentor was none other than the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was the one who he went to as a young university student. Maybe let me just say a little bit about Rabbi Sacks's biography and his history. And Rabbi Sacks was born in 1948, lovely year to be born in. And he speaks about, you can see it on the source sheet that I gave you, he speaks about how his father wasn't particularly learned. His father hadn't gone to yeshiva. His father had not had an opportunity to study Judaism at a high level. And his father always said to him, you know what, you teach me, you come along, and you can take a look at this on your source sheet on page, since I'm not managing to share it, it's on page 5 of your source sheet, the top source. My father was a simple man who lived by simple truths. He had a hard life. He came to the West as a child fleeing from persecution and had to leave school at the age of 14 to support his family. When I was young, I used to ask him many questions about Judaism, and his answer was always the same. Jonathan, he said, I didn't have an education, and so I don't know the answer to your questions, but one day you will have the education I missed, and then you will teach me the answers. Says Rabbi Sacks, could anyone have been given a greater gift than that? He was a proud Jew, and he wanted his children to go further than he could along the path of faith. And so this is the type of home he grew up in. If you keep with the biographical notes, I'm going to relate to source number 3 and 4. As a teenager, Rabbi Sacks didn't go to Jewish schools. He went to secondary schools in non-Jewish schools and got maybe what you might call the best education you could in England. His brother always noted that he was very, very serious, right? Even at age 16, he used to wear a suit, right? He never played cricket or football, but was involved with debating and politics. From a young age, he saw himself as an intellectual. He'd wear a suit for school. And if you look at the bottom source, 3b, Margaret Thatcher, he says, I knew her when I was a child at school. This is Rabbi Sacks. She was my local member of parliament. And when I had an essay to write about politics, I would go into her constituency office to hear what she had to say. So can you imagine a 16-year-old Rabbi Sacks having some political ideas, and he would go and discuss them with his local member of parliament, who happened to be Margaret Thatcher, who eventually would go on to become the Iron Lady. His home was a traditional, proud Jewish home. He went to shul on Shabbat. He went to Bnei Akiva, and he always loved Bnei Akiva as a result. And when he finished high school, he went to Cambridge. And he describes his experience in Cambridge as just a remarkable one. We're going to see it next time. He says, I went into the world, I could see there was no limits to who I could become. And then the most amazing thing happened, and that was the Six-Day War. And the Six-Day War, he says, was like a trauma in the Jewish people. People came out of the woodwork as Jews who he didn't even know were Jews. Everybody gathered in the synagogue in Cambridge. And that's when Rabbi Sacks started asking himself the most fundamental questions about his Judaism. He got hold of a symposium in the Commentary magazine called The Condition of Jewish Belief, which asked all different leaders, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, questions about their Judaism. And the next summer, he decided to go to the United States, buy a Greyhound ticket, sort of a Chofshi Chodshi, that he could go anywhere he likes, and he would go and seek as many of those leaders that he could. And that was when he met Rabbi Soloveitchik, who he says taught him about halacha. And that is when he met the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the amazing thing about his meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe was this, or so he says. He went into the Lubavitcher Rebbe with questions, but the Rebbe said to him, "What are you doing in Cambridge? How many Jews are there in Cambridge? Can you influence any of them? How many of them are Jewish engaged?" He said, instead of me asking questions to the Rebbe was asking questions of me. And that was where Rabbi Sacks says, great leaders create followers. Good leaders create followers, but great leaders create leaders. Rabbi Sacks learned from the Lubavitcher Rebbe the idea that you had to be able to stimulate people. You had to be able to stimulate them in order to grow. And that's what he did for all sorts of people throughout his career. He graduated from Cambridge. He got a postgrad in Oxford. His PhD, his PhD was about Jewish responsibility. It was about the mitzvah of hocheach tochiach, which is the idea of Jewish responsibility. And this is where his interest in Jewish responsibility was born. We'll talk about that in just 1 minute. He then went to study for years in what then was called Jews College, which was the Orthodox Rabbinical Seminary in London. He had a teacher who was a world scholar in mathematics and in Talmud. His name was Rav Nachum Rabinovich. He later went on to become the Rosh Yeshiva of Ma'aleh Adumim Yeshiva. I spoke to Rabbi Sacks, Rav Rabinovich's son. He was actually my chavruta in Yeshiva. And he said for the 4 years that Rabbi Sacks was studying with Rabbi Rabinovich, there wasn't a day that Rabbi Sacks didn't call up their house with this question or that discussion. He used to study with him in the morning, and he used to phone him up in the evening. In fact, people who studied in that class said that the class was like listening to a chavruta between the young Jonathan Sacks, who wasn't yet a rabbi, and wasn't even yet a doctor, and Rav Rabinovich. Rabbi Sacks did 2 smichas, 2 rabbinical ordinations. The first with Rabbi Rabinovich, which was in Orach Chaim, in the laws of the Chagim, in the laws of Shabbat, and the laws of prayer. That's what they gave in Jews College. And he decided he wanted to do the traditional smicha in Yoredea, and that he did in Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Golders Green, which meant that he was doing his PhD and 2 smichas at the same time. Quite an incredible feat. He then became the rabbi of Golders Green Synagogue, the head, the principal of Jews College, and later became chief rabbi, retired in 2013, and passed away in the year 2020. And of course, he was a world statesman. 30 books, over 18 honorary doctorates, a chair at YU, etc., etc. So I want to go on today to his literary output and understand what he was doing with his literary output. So let me try and share the screen, if I can. And what you should have on the screen is, here, sorry, half a second. Is a list of Rabbi Sacks's books. And I want to explain what I've done here in doing this. And if you want to look, trying to find it, it's on page, here it is. This is a list, page 3 gives a list of all of his books. Now, if you take a look at this list, I've highlighted some of them. What have I highlighted? I've highlighted the books which are either Chumash or they deal with prayer. So in blue, you will see, for example, his Haggadah, his prayer book, his Machzorim. By the way, the introduction to the Machzorim, each one is a masterpiece to explain that Chag. And then what you'll see in yellow is all sorts of books, right, which were on the Chumash. Confident Conversation, Genesis, Exodus, right? A weekly reading of the Hebrew Bible, lessons in leadership. So if we take all of those out, and then there are two in gray, line 11 and line 15, you'll see in gray. These are collected columns from the BBC and collected columns from the Times. If you take all of those out, what did Rabbi Sacks write? So let's take a look at all of that, and we'll see what we can come up with. So I've put them into a list here, which I think is more coherent. So let's take a look at what we have. Is this readable to you? Maybe this is better. Okay, the first category I've put here are understanding the Jewish world in the 20th century. And that was the first topic that Rabbi Sacks was really fascinated by. I mentioned that his PhD was in the question of Hocheach Tochiach, Jewish responsibility. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh bazeh. Can Jews be responsible for one another? And indeed, his first writings, line 1, Traditional Alternatives, called in America Arguments for the Sake of Heaven, was explaining, this was the first book that I wrote for him, and one of the books that made me fall in love with Rabbi Sacks' writings, because what he was doing there was explaining how the Jewish world got to be how it was. Why are there Haredim, and why are there Chilonim, and why are there Zionists, and why are there Reform Jews? And can we get along together? In fact, in the conclusion of that book, he imagines how each stream and each group in Judaism has climbed up its own mountain. And now we've all reached the pinnacle of our mountain. The Reform Jews have lived out their Reform Judaism, and the Zionists have built a state, and the Haredim have built their enclaves, and etc. But we're all on different mountains. And how are we now going to be together? That's also true about line 4. One people, tradition, modernity, and Jewish unity. In other words, the books he was writing between 1989 and 1993 were all about, can we be one people? What are the major ideas that are firing Jewish ideas in the 20th century? And that's true about line number 2, Tradition in an Untraditional Age, which is a collection of articles, but articles which deal with major leaders of modern Orthodoxy, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rav Kook, and the big questions, faith after the Holocaust, the question of alienation of faith, and all sorts of essays that he'd written during the 1980s. Another wonderful book is Crisis and Covenant, Jewish Thought After the Holocaust. We're not going to deal with that now. That's the first group of books. Second group of books, and you can see maybe it's not surprising that the first one is just after he became chief rabbi. Will we have Jewish grandchildren? His second question was, why be Jewish? Should be a question mark there. And the Jewish future. His book in 2000, A Letter in the Scroll, was a manifesto. Why be Jewish? In fact, the very last chapter, we're going to study this book in a future class, is Why I Am a Jew. And he wrote another book in 2009, Future Tense, A Vision for Jews and Judaism in a Globalized World. And that book actually talks about Medina Israel. We'll do a class about Rabbi Sacks and Medina Israel, and we'll see that. What else? So group number 3, The Place of Religion in a World of Religious Violence. The first book written in 2002, after the fall of the World Trade Center. Rabbi Sacks wanted to address how to avoid the clash of civilizations. He says, I stood in the ruins of the World Trade Center at Ground Zero, and I said to myself, how can it be that religious people have performed this destruction? And he said, if religion is the problem, religion has to become the answer. He revisited this theme in 2015, writing a book, Not in God's Name, bringing in new thoughts that he had come to over the last 13 years, but also this was the height of talking about ISIS, and people were worried about new religious fundamentalism. So Rabbi Sacks wrote another book. Number 4, Religion and Science, Faith and Atheism. Rabbi Sacks, if you look at this book, it's called The Great Partnership. Some of you might have read it, God, Science, and the Search for Meaning. And I've always said that this is a book about religion and science, but more than that, it's a book about meaning. Rabbi Sacks was haunted about a world with no meaning. He was worried that when people spoke about evolution, people would think that this is a world that just came into being and has no purpose. Rabbi Sacks couldn't tolerate that. A world without meaning was not a world worth living in. And that's what this book is about. Category 5, secular society and modern morals. What do we have here? The persistence of faith. This was a series of very prestigious lectures, the Reith Lectures on the BBC, which he gave just before he became chief rabbi. The Politics of Hope in 1997, The Home We Build Together, Recreating Society in 2007, and then his final book in 2020, Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. All of these themes, there's a lot of overlap between the books. All of these themes are about how we can live with values in a modern, individualized world. He has a book, number 6, about chesed, one of Rabbi Sacks's key themes, to heal a fractured world, the ethics of responsibility, and then, of course, a very small line, but a very significant one, his Chumash, or his Torah commentary, which is just magnificent, magnificent. So much creativity, it's become a big hit here in Israel. His Siddur, his Haggadah, his introductions to the Chagim. So if you want to put in 7 pillars, 7 different categories, his writings, this is what you will see. And maybe let me try and relate to why Rabbi Sacks wrote so much and what he was trying to do in his writings. And if I had the video, if I had my computer working properly, I'd share some videos. You'll see them in the, I put a list of videos here. Take a look on page 2. And I'll just tell you what the videos say, since I'm a little nervous about playing them at this given moment. This one, which says a tortoise thinking with Rabbi Sacks, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. If you take a look, it's actually a fabulous interview with Rabbi Sacks in the last year of his life. And he talks about a world of identity politics, a world which is post-truth. And they ask him, how do you deal with that? And he said, that is why I write books. And he says something remarkable. He said to me also in personal conversation, Rabbi Sacks said, when he was younger, he was fabulous on the debating team. He said, I was so good at debating, I realized I could convince people of things that even I didn't believe in. I could string an argument together and tell a story and convince people of wild things. And it frightened me. It frightened me, he said. That's the sort of, that rhetorical usage is the sort of thing that dictators use. And it's that, he says, that's when I decided that I would write books. Books could be argued with. People can check up my sources. People can review me. People can argue with me. That's why I wrote books. If you look at the Boca Raton, Rabbi Ephraim Goldman Behind the Bima podcast, and you look at minute 21, it will tell you, it's again a fabulous interview, short interview, but he writes about the fact that for years he wanted to write, and he was always trying to write and write and write. And he read in a book by Sir George Bernard Shaw that if you don't write a book by your 40th birthday, you never will. And he said it haunted him. He used to sit there in breaks in the theater or in the opera and be scribbling notes on pieces of paper. He says he has in his filing cabinet all sorts of different books. And it got to his 40th birthday, he says, I have to write. And that's when he wrote his first book at the last minute. And he says, and ever since then, I've written a book a year. A book a year. He used to pick a theme at the beginning of the year and spend the whole year receiving books, reading about it, researching it. And then he used to take off 6 weeks in the summer, 6 to 8 weeks, and sit and write the whole books. I spoke to the people at Koren Publishers. They said they never got books which were so finely edited, which were perfect as the books that Rabbi Sacks had given them, which is quite remarkable. And that's what we have there. Now, I'd like to actually suggest something here. One of the questions that I always have about Rabbi Sacks is why he kept on repeating certain themes. For example, if you write about religious violence in 2002, then why do you need to write again about it in 2015? I remember after he passed away, I had just read the book Morality, and I went and reread the book Politics of Hope from 1997. And to be honest, it's got exactly the same argument. Just the 2020 book is updated with the current problems, but the essential theory is exactly the same. What's he doing? And here I'd like to maybe cast Rabbi Sacks. Is Rabbi Sacks a philosopher? Is Rabbi Sacks a rabbi? You know, Professor Johnny Reinhold from Bar-Ilan University said he's not a rabbi, he's not a philosopher, he's what we call a public intellectual. A public intellectual means that he addresses the problems of the day. And he does so in such a way with using pithy one-liners. His writing became more and more popular as the years went by. One of the people who spoke at his funeral spoke about the fact that when he wrote his PhD, he was proud of the fact that it was incomprehensible to anybody who wasn't a philosopher. He loved writing in that sort of thick, heavy academic style. Well, as the years went on, his writing became more and more popular, more and more readable, because he realized he had to communicate. And communicate he did. And in this regard, maybe this explains why he revisited themes over and over and over. Because if you're a public intellectual, or should I say it, if you're a pulpit rabbi, if you have to address the question of, people using their time, not well, or the value of family, or spending time with your kids, or making sure that your marriage is strong. You don't talk about it just once and never visit it again. You talk about it this year and next year and the following year. If you want to talk about the value of prayer, you'll talk about it again and again. And in this regard, Rabbi Sacks was a preacher. Rabbi Sacks, or maybe I'll even say more than that, I think Rabbi Sacks was a polemicist. He loved a good fight. He loved a good debate. He was always on the debating society. When he wrote his book about science and meaning, he decided to have public debates with the leading evolutionists, biologists at the time. He was looking to convince people. He was looking to be relevant. And that, I hope, has given you a sketch today of some of the issues behind Rabbi Sacks. If anybody would like to write any questions in the chat, I'm going to open the chat now, and I'll try and relate to any questions that we have. I'm going to try and clear up my computer problems before next week. And next week, look forward to being back with you.
We will conclude here. We're all looking forward to being together again next week. Please do look at our website for more upcoming classes. We have so many class offerings this session. So our website is drisha.org, and we hope that you join us for additional classes. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience with us today. And I can't wait to see you next week, hopefully with the perfect Wi-Fi connection. Lehitraot. Bye-bye.